And good morning, everyone. Today, I have the great pleasure of having Christine Ryan with me to talk to us about Ireland and her life as an Irish expat here in Victoria. And yeah, so in honor of St. Patrick's Day, which is just 2 days from now, very, very honored to have Christine with us. So welcome to the show, Christine.
Thank you, Adrian, and Law Éile Pádraig. Happy St. Patrick's Day.
Say that one more
Almost St. Patrick's Day.
time. Thanks. Say that one more time. The in Gaelic.
Oh, yeah. Law Éile Pádraig.
Wow.
Hmm.
I won't try and repeat it, but it sounds
No,
beautiful.
that's okay. You can practice it later.
I will. So yes, please launch right into it. Tell us a bit about your background in Ireland before coming to Canada.
All right. So I was born in Dublin, Dublin's fair city. It wasn't the most, auspicious of beginnings. I was like so many children of the 70s and whatnot. I was put into an orphanage. My mum had sad circumstances. She was originally from Cork, and my father, I believe, is from Sligo. But in any event, she was an unwed mother, so I was put into an orphanage. And then I was adopted by this lovely, young, hip, and fabulous Dublin couple. And we lived on the north side of Dublin, and I'm a very proud North Sider. I just miss I miss so many things about Dublin, but I think I miss the fun of the north side and the attitude and just the personalities. Yeah, so I was born there, and I lived there until I was in Ireland. Traveled a bit, of course, and then not for an extended period of time, no more than a summer here and a summer there. And I left when I was 37, 38. Yeah. Well, I met my husband in a pub in Dublin, as you do. So let's not, debunk any stereotypes there. Um, yeah, I was in a pub waiting on a friend, and I was drinking a glass of Coke, and I was driving, so I was just sitting there waiting, and then there was this fella across from me, sitting in a wingback chair drinking a little scotch, and he was dressed up, and it turns out it was he was going to he was going to an awards thing, and he was waiting on a train, and that gentleman was Shane Ryan, my now husband. My husband was born in BC to Irish immigrants. So Ryan is my surname, and that's my married name. Um, so he had the Irish passport, and he had a startup company in Dublin, a tech company. Tech was pretty much, it was booming there. And he told me he was from Vancouver Island, and we talked about it. And I knew where it was. I'd heard about it. And we start dating, and then after a year we got engaged, and we decided to make the move as soon as my PR status came in, because I wanted to be able to hit the ground running. I didn't want to come over. I had a baby during that time. I didn't want to come over with my baby and have to leave, on a short-term visa or whatnot, and separate the family. So I waited for my PR status to come in, which took forever, and it was hilarious because I'd be walking down the street and I'd see a friend or somebody new, and they'd say, "I thought you were going to Canada." And you told me last year you were going to Canada. I said, "I am. I am. I'm just waiting for my visa." They thought you could just get on a plane and go. And I said, "No, no, I'm waiting for my green card thing to come in." And they're like, "You're not going anywhere. You're just all talk." And it's just, so as soon as it came in, I said to my husband, I said, "I've just had a baby, but I feel like I have to just go now because I've been telling everyone for a year and a half that I'm going to Canada. They're like, 'You're still here. What are you doing?'" So as soon as the PR status came in, I just had the baby, as I said, but we waited about a good 3 months so that my family could enjoy her, my little girl, and so we could get a little bit of help. And then we left Ireland on a one-way ticket with a 3.5-month-old baby and 4 suitcases. for a different life. Yeah, my husband hadn't been here in 15, 16 years, so he was really coming back to something that was very different. You know, he left when he was in his 20s. He was coming back as a married man. You know, his friends had, moved on with their lives, got married or moved away. So he wasn't really sure what he was coming back into either. So it was very new and scary. And I think we were a little naive about it as well, but we were excited all the same.
And what year was that? Can I ask?
2014.
14. Wow.
7th of October 2014, I landed, carrying the baby on the hip, standing in immigration, thinking, was this such a good idea? But um, I left. I was relatively happy to leave. I think it's worth having an honest discussion today. Um, I do love my country. I miss a lot about it. When we were there, the taxes were quite high. There's a lot of beauty in the country, but there's a reason people leave, and they say that our best exports are our people. And there's a reason that the people leave, So our taxes were extraordinarily high. We were working constantly. I was a paralegal specializing in property law, wills and estates. My husband was his startup. He was working with that, and then he jumped onto the stock exchange, and he was a manager in the stock exchange, running a team of developers. So he had a really, really, really good job, but we had no money and we couldn't afford to buy a house. And he was cycling a bike to work, and not that that's an issue, but we felt that he felt that he was on a treadmill. I guess I was used to it because this is just the way things were. But he said, no, doesn't have to be like this. And my father had said it was like this in the 80s. And they had a chat, and we sat down as a family with my parents, and we talked about the possibility of us going. And my dad essentially gave his blessing. He said, yeah, you're probably, I'd miss you, but I think you're better off, because he left in the 80s and he worked on the building sites in Queens for 6 months a week, off and on. Yeah, because the taxes were so high, you have to get out. There's no work. So we'd had quite a bit of a recession in Ireland as well. And we had an economic bubble and a housing bubble that was completely and utterly false. So it was a tough time when I left, and I was sad to leave, of course, because of my cultural, my love for the culture, my love for my friends and family, and the 38 years that I had lived there, and all the relationships and my work. But on the other hand, where I wanted something different. I was ready to try it. And then when you leave somewhere like that, folks say to you, "Oh, well, look, look, if it doesn't work out, you can always come back." And I'm like, I will. No, I'm sorry. This has to work. I don't have a return ticket for a year's time where I come back. There's nothing wrong with going for a time and going back, but I was going with, my Canadian husband. I was on a green card. It was, a new life with my daughter. I wasn't going for a year or to have a working holiday or to do some traveling. It was I was going, and that was it. And I think the Irish stubbornness, Adrian, when you're going somewhere like that and you're doing something like that, it would feel strange to give up and go back. So I was determined to make it work for me, hell or high water.
Yeah. It's interesting listening to the parallels, just between, I think of our closest Canadian context here, and not what's the word, draw a connection between two things that aren't necessarily connected. But in Newfoundland, which does have a strong Irish heritage, a lot of Newfoundlanders are well known for crisscrossing the country, and, well, primarily going to Alberta to work in the oil patch, at least back in the 90s and the 80s and 90s. And so I
Really?
grew up around a lot of Newfoundlanders, and they spoke with very Newfoundlander accent. And I'm not sure, have you had the chance to go to Newfoundland before, or have you met anyone from Newfoundland?
I've met a couple of people. but I haven't had the opportunity, and I do think I'd like it from what I've been told. I feel very at home there. Blustery, it's windy, it rains a lot, and the people are fantastic. So yeah,
Yeah.
someday, someday.
Well, yeah. No, well, just sort of that, when home isn't necessarily always home, when, that we have certain countries and cultures around the world where it's quite common for people to pack up a suitcase and go away for a year or 2 years to
Yeah.
weather a downturn in their home country's economy. And I also, so Ireland, is it quite common for your friends who sort of said to you, you can always come back? Is that maybe because there are many Irish young folks who go to the continent, maybe to work in Spain or to, like in the tourist resorts, or in the UK, probably there's a lot of Irish folks who go over to England
Mm.
and then come back and forth, or
Um, I think folks are always scared that you'll leave and you won't come back like so many did before. There's always that little bit of, I think, the Irish famine whereby we had this mass exodus. And the I know that the Frank Flood, our wonderful ambassador here in BC, he's working on getting some Irish people back. So they're always trying to get. There's always an initiative, in some form or another, with the government to try and bring the Irish back and bring the talent back, and try and keep the talent there. I'm not necessarily referring to myself now, but I know that that's a general thing that they're always trying to do, because so many people do leave, and there's reasons. They have their reasons for it. But I think that it's also a great thing for the world. You're from northwestern Europe, but to have the opportunity to travel is and come back is a really beautiful thing. Back in the 60s or whatnot, in the 70s, when my in-laws left, so they didn't see their families for 10 years. It was like once every 10 years. Whereas we have some really travel is so widely available to folks now that I think it's a good thing, and they do come back more often than not because they can, and it's more available to them.
yeah. Yeah, no, I think Victoria is definitely, I was thinking sort of Victoria is sort of a world away from Northwestern Europe, whereas, for those who go to work in, say, London, Dublin to London is like an hour, maybe an hour flight or an hour and a half flight. So it's a lot,
Yeah,
lot realistic.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's great. And then even when they go down to Australia, a lot of the Irish, even with their fair skins, they loved Australia. Mad for the sun, all came back scalded. But they go down to Australia. So Australia and Canada were quite big draws in recent years for Irish folks, and a lot of the younger ones, when they finish their college degree, or they want to get some work experience, they'll hop down on the year-long visa, have a great time, a working holiday, more holiday than work, I'm sure. But they do the working holiday and then they'll come back. And it's a really nice experience. And my sister did that. She went for 6 months and she had a great time. But for me, it was a little, I think my experience, and I was, I emigrated, you know, as I left with the intention of not going back.
And sorry, not to flog a dead horse here, but I'm just fascinated by this piece of our discussion. But it is interesting that in this day and age, I mean, I'm a big fan of history, student of history, and you do read the stories of those Irish folks who left during the potato famine and during other times in history, and it was sort of, maybe it was a more permanent thing because you were boarding a steamship with your family and taking all of your belongings, and that was it. And nowadays, like in your husband's example, being the son of two Irish immigrants who then returned to Ireland. So I think we live in this fantastically, I mean, what I guess we're in such a globalized world that, say, for your daughter's generation, maybe she, who knows, Ireland is the roaring Celtic tiger once again,
Yeah.
20 years from now, and there are opportunities for her that weren't there necessarily for you.
It's very exciting. I do have my little fantasies of her going to one of the colleges over there and having opportunity that I didn't have when I was growing up. And we have family over there, obviously my mum and dad. But in the future, my sister's there, my sister's children. She has a lot. My little one has a. She's the only child. She's an only child, and she's the only grandchild of my in-laws. So she doesn't have the siblings or the cousins, whereas when she goes back to Ireland, there's like a gang. There's just a gang of kids for her to play with. I mean, obviously not in COVID times, but in when we were there last a couple of years ago, it's been exactly 2 years. My nephews were getting christened, and we went there, and there's just kids, just my cousins, my sister's kids, my friends' kids, my godchildren, just kids everywhere. Lots of, I think from this social perspective, she would have had a really, really fun upbringing. She would have had a lot of kids to play with. We have I love that familial connection whereby, blood is thicker than water. That's an expression that's used quite a lot. And we tend to stick together. Whereas here, she doesn't have the familial or she just doesn't have as much. So she has school and she does after school care. So that social thing for her, I do feel that she's missing out, but she benefits by being here in so many other ways, Adrian. It's a completely different way of life. The differences in terms of daily living. So when I chat to my husband about his experiences growing up here in BC, and then I chat about my experiences, and we're the same age. But he jokes that it sounds like I'm from Dickensian London. Do you know what I mean? Because we were burning coal until the 90s. So like such a small little thing like that can really, it's, you're at home, that's your only source of heat is the coal. And then you have the coal. This is in the early 90s, now we're teenagers at this stage, right? And the coal man's coming by on his horse and trap. This is Dublin City. This is an extraordinarily, I mean, the culture there is out of this world. It's very advanced. We've the best college for surgeons. We have so much going for us. But in the day-to-day living side of things, it was ordinary to me, but it's bizarre to other people. And I think maybe your listeners might find this interesting that in the 90s, the coal man, completely black head to toe, was going by on his horse and trap, delivering coal, and you bring it into the house and you put it into the hole under the stairs, and that's your heat. And if you can't afford the coal, and thank God it was cheap, that's why folk burnt it, and that's why they kept it going for so long, because of the poverty in the country. That's why they kept it till the mid 90s. But having that as your only source of heat, and you'd have a bottle of gas, and you'd have it in a little super stair. I don't know if anybody knows what I'm talking about, but you'd have this little bottle of gas in the corner, and you press the button and it ignites a little flame, and that's your backup heat, and that's what you get dressed for school beside in the morning. And the house is freezing cold, and it's damp, no central heating. A lot of folks we're all going through the same thing, and you're going to bed in the 80s in particular, you go to bed hungry quite often, because your father is away working, or he's joined an army, he's just doing anything to get work. So I'm not going to say they were better times, but I think those kind of experiences, and it's a very forward country, very progressive in so many ways, and medicine and whatnot. But it was quite backwards in some ways as well. And there was a lot of oppression with the church and state, hand in hand. So the schools were difficult. You have the Christian Brothers teaching, you were the nuns, and corporal punishment was permitted until, I think, the mid to late 80s. So it was very, the violence in the culture as well. That's another thing that didn't seem to be as prevalent here. So your teachers at school were permitted to beat you if you were naughty. And then you go home and tell your parents, and they said, well, you must have done something wrong, because they would have been beaten at school as well. And it's just the way it was. And it's very strange to me if my daughter came home and said my teacher was hitting me. I don't know. There's a lot of so it's not just to go back to what you were saying, it's not just the history that, we're not all just sitting around thinking about what happened to us in the past and lamenting the English taking us, lamenting the the Vikings take is lamenting the famine. You're living in it, you're getting by day to day. And that was very much, and still is very much, given what's happening now. Getting by day to day is where your focus is. And that's not easy somewhere like that. Yeah, when I'm missing home, when I'm missing Ireland, how I get my, cultural fix, so to speak, is we have movie nights here at home, and my sister-in-law, she lived in Ireland. She was born in Ireland, actually. She lived in Ireland for quite some time, so she's very familiar as an adult. So she's very familiar with the culture. So I'm introducing her to Irish movies she wouldn't have ordinarily seen. She's seen, everybody's seen Angela Sasha's My Left Foot, the really big powerhouse movies that are beautifully made, beautifully shot, but not the whole picture in terms of the modern Irish culture. They're more backwards looking, at a snapshot in time. So we have some really good movies, and I love to watch those movies. Cillian Murphy's quite famous now, but he was, before he was widely known, he made so many really, really fantastic Irish movies, and I'd be quite a fan of his work. So I watch a lot of the Irish movies, and I just love, particularly the ones that are set in Dublin. Like The Commitments is just so funny and it's brilliant. That was, again, that's kind of looking at a time in the 80s when, but we have some really, really good modern movies, and the music is. I listen to a lot of our music. I listen to the older stuff and the newer stuff, and then when I'm missing Ireland, what I do is I just break into songs sometimes. I go into my office and they're like, oh, here she is now. She's in a good mood. And then I just start singing to the receptionist, just break into song. Because that's what we love to do in Ireland. It's a fun thing. Can't help myself. And I don't care who's listening, and I don't care that I can't sing. It's just a cultural thing. I just love to. I might break into song before this is over, so I'm trying to be good. I'm trying to behave myself, Adrian. We were taught it at school as one of our basic subjects all the way through, but it was not the older generation necessarily. Like my parents, my grandparents didn't speak it. It's regions in the country that would speak it. Okay, so they're called the Gaeltacht, which means they're Irish, predominantly Irish language areas and counties and cultures. So some kids as teenagers, they'd be sent off to the Gaeltacht for a few weeks in the summer, and it was just an excuse to party. I wasn't allowed to go because my mum and dad were quite clued in and streetwise, so they knew what was going on down there, so they didn't let me go, which more's the pity. One of the biggest regrets of my life. But yeah, you speak Os Gaeilge, and you're penalised if you don't speak in the Irish language. And interestingly, Gaelic is Scots, and Gaeilge is Irish. So we would never have referred to it as Gaelic, because that's not our language. It's Gaeilge. Yeah, or Irish. Yeah, Irish language. We have our own Irish language TV station. So I speak a little bit. I'd say Nisha Valkado Tasha Amdam Nuacht, which means essentially now at 6 o'clock it's time for the news. They always introduce the news in Irish, and they'd have an Irish portion of the news, so I can do the news in Irish, but I can't really have a day-to-day conversation in Irish, if that makes any sense. So I'm not fluent.
There's so much history in that language, though. It just sounds like, the words coming off your tongue are the words that were spoken by people thousands of years ago. And
Yeah.
that's an interesting connection, right?
It's a shame that it is such a it's not a widespread language. My daughter speaks a little bit of it, but sadly it's probably not something I'm going to teach a lot of it. I'm not going to teach her too much of it, because it's not a useful language for her going forward. I think it's nice for her to know the cúpla focal, which means the few words. I didn't actually just swear there. It's nice for her to have the few words Os Gaeilge in Irish, but I don't know that it's something that I want to fill her head with, because I don't think it's going to benefit her, which is really, it's when when you think about it, it's a little disappointing. It's an awful shame. It is a shame that it's dying out.
Are there any Gaeilge sort of words and expressions that commonly are peppered sort of throughout the language? Like you must have, like you have like a word for supper, or is common words that you use sometimes that are Gaeilge?
Yeah, so the one that I would use for my daughter in day-to-day living is the laba. Laba is bed. So, get into your laba. And or I'm going to the laba. I'm going to the bed. Bonya is milk. My husband loves to say bonya. So we use the bonya, we use laba, just little small, Fwiniog is window, June on Durs, I close the door if there's a draft. And an Irish woman can feel a draft at 1,000 paces. It's one of our gifts. So do not Durs, close the door. But there's one word that I have to tell you, Adrian, that I had to stop using because it's very, very widely used in Ireland, not just by the Dubs, but in Ireland as a whole, to describe everything, and that's crack. So CRAIC. The crack, it's the fun. Okay, the fun. So I first came here and everything was great crack. Sure, it's no crack. He's great crack. She's no crack.
Wow.
That's not great crack.
Wow.
The crack is mighty. Everything is all of our vernacular is so interspersed with crack, the word crack, that I still find it difficult. But at the beginning, I'd come here and my husband said, you have to stop using that word. I said, everybody knows what it is. And he said, they really don't. So I know I sound quite naive and foolish to even think that was a word that was widely known, but I did. And I found it very, very tough. So I'd be at the playground with the new baby, and I'd be trying to talk to, other new mothers and make friends because I didn't know anybody here, aside from my husband, obviously. And I'd be saying, "Oh yes, and this, I thought, how do you find it here?" Say, "Oh yeah, it's great crack." And they say, "Oh, the crack is great," They're looking at me.
Not in small.
I didn't make many friends those first few weeks, and now I think I know why. Uh, wow. So the culturally, no, it's very different. The weather is similar. The weather is a little better here. It's less damp, even though it's a temperate climate. It's less damp. It's not as windy. But other than that, it rains a lot and it's grey quite often, and I feel very at home there. That doesn't bother me whatsoever. And I don't mind a grey day because that it reminds me of Ireland. So it's kind of it's a bittersweet day when you're out there and it's raining and it's windy and it's chilly, and it just reminds me. I feel quite. It just brings me back to when I lived there and we were always cold and it was rain. It's always raining, It's always raining. We don't really have seasons or summers. Um, but the weather's the primary thing that does remind me, except for the hot summer here, and that we're very fortunate to have. But the weather is the one thing. Culture, in terms of the food is quite different. And I want to say, I'll start off by saying that this is my home. This is where I live. I've been here 6.5, it'll be 7 years in October. This is this is somewhere that I see myself retiring in. I've built a life here. My husband and my daughter are here. I've got a business. I've got a career. I've got friends. I've got a lot of. I'm very fortunate to live here. Um, but I miss the food. I have to say, it's not the same. It's just not the same. I mean, not that, wet boiled meats. That's really what we have. Come on, there's no cuisine. It's not, tapas or French, garlic, or it's very bland food. But I do miss the way we do our foods over there, and the style, the texture of the meats. Really little things like that do make a huge difference to me and do affect me. The sausages, you can't get the Super Quinn, that's a brand. You can't get the Super Quinn sausages. And just the sausage meat tastes so different that I just can't eat a sausage here. I love sausages. It's just silly. But the food is not my favorite. And the bread is quite sweet here. even when it's not sweet, if that makes any sense. When you go to the bakery, it still tastes sweeter to me. I'm becoming more used to it, but I couldn't eat the bread for a while. It just tasted like cake to me when I first came here. So everything is sweeter, whereas everything is the foods are saltier in Ireland and in Europe as a whole. Wouldn't be as sweet. So little things like that. But that really does. I do miss the food. That's what I do miss. I think on a small day-to-day basis, eating my meals, I think of the food quite often. So just the differences, what it means to be Irish. Okay, so I'd come here, people would hear me speak and they'd say, "Oh, are you Irish?" And I'd say, "Yeah, 100% Irish beef export." They stamped me on the rump and sent me off. And they'd say in their North American accent, "Oh, I'm Irish too." And I'd look at them and I would just be confused. I don't understand. Where are you from? And I'd look for that connection and I wouldn't find it. So it upset me for a little bit and I couldn't really understand why. I didn't, I felt a little offended or something. I don't know what it was. But then I realized and I actually looked into it and I read about it and I was on Google and I can't remember this is not my explanation. So I can't remember the gentleman who I can't remember his name, so I can't attribute it to him. But I was reading this gentleman studied Irish culture and what it means to be Irish in a thesis. And he said that for the for those abroad, specifically relating to the North American Irish um, experience of being Irish, it relates to ancestry, and the family tree, and they feel Irish. That makes them feel Irish, that their grandparents came over or their great 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 grand, they identify with that. Whereas the Irish themselves equate being Irish with culture and shared experiences. So, to give you an example of that, um, if I'm in Ireland and I'm sitting with a friend and I'm having dinner or a drink or something, and their mother was Asian, let's just say, right? I mean, completely physically different to me. Their mother was Asian, their father was Asian, and they look different, but they sound like me. And they speak in the same colloquialisms as I do. We've shared experiences and we're complaining about the same things or we're celebrating the same things and we're identifying with each other on a cultural level. That's to me, that's Irish. So not necessarily the ancestry, but the shared experiences of this person that I'm hypothetical person was reared in Ireland, or has been living there for quite some time, and then to me they're Irish. So someone who's gone through the trials and tribulations of living in that culture, and that's to me that's okay. That's okay, but I've learned to accept that that's not necessarily it's not the same for everybody. And, I try to put myself in the shoes of even my husband who identifies as Irish because he was raised by Irish people. But when he went to Ireland, people were calling him a plastic Paddy, which means it's somebody who thinks they're Irish, but they're not. And it's really derogatory. But and he was told in no uncertain terms that he's not Irish because he doesn't have the accent and he's not like us. Do you know what I mean? He doesn't have the shared experience, and it's not nice necessarily, but that's how it is viewed as a whole, quite frankly. And but I understand now that folks who were their grandparents or the parents or somebody way back, I listened to Conan O'Brien's podcast and he identifies as Irish. And I understand now that that's something that it means something to people. And who am I to take that away from them? It's just different. It's different, but it's okay. The trucks, the size of the trucks. I loved it. I couldn't believe it. The cars are quite small because our roads are small, for the most part in Ireland. So the little hatchbacks. I don't know if you know little hatchback cars. So the Ford Fiestas and the little Kias. They're very very popular because they're easy to park on the congested streets. So European cars tend to be smaller to fit into those smaller spaces and drive on those smaller roads. So when I got here and I saw the trucks, Adrian, I thought it was brilliant. I couldn't believe them. They were like monster trucks to me. But now I'm used to them, of course. I'm used to seeing them. But I still remember sitting in Denny's cafe downtown, looking out the window at the trucks going by and just being fascinated. It's very clear to me, that memory. That really stuck with me for some reason. That's a big, big difference to me. I'd go back once a year or thereabouts. I'd say probably every 14 months. My husband doesn't go back because he's from here, and a lot of his friends are now actually gone. His best friend from Ireland that is now living in San Francisco, and then his other friend is now living in Seville. So a lot of his friends have emigrated too. So he doesn't go back. But my daughter and I obviously go back because I want her to be very, she's Irish Canadian. She's got her dual citizenship, and I want her to be part of that culture too. And I want to see my mum and dad and my nieces and nephews and godchildren and my friends. It's great. Technology is fantastic now because, as I like to say, my mother's still nagging me from 8,000 miles away. Oh, I don't like your hair. I don't like this. So it's great that we have that now. It's a much more, they're much more accessible, and I can just phone my mother, time difference permitting, and chat to her if I want, and see photos of my nephews growing up, and I miss everybody, and I do miss them. And with COVID, I didn't get to go back, so it's been 2 years, and I really do feel that it's 2 years this month, Adrian, and I really feel it. I really, really feel it, and I'd love to be able to get back as soon as this is over. I'll be booking the flight for myself and my daughter, and we'll be going, and we'll be having a grand old time. You travel to Ireland. This is over. Go and experience it because it's a beautiful place. But the people, they're known all over the world for their hospitality, and we rely so heavily over there on tourism, and that's hard hit at the moment. So please, 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 when this is over, book a flight to Ireland, go and experience it. Enjoy the bland food, but enjoy the crack. Please go. It's a great place. In honor of all things Irish this week, it's a beautiful poem. It's called beautiful history behind it as well. It's called The Planter's Daughters by Austin Clarke. Again, it's mercifully short. The planters were the English folk who were put onto the Irish lands back in the day. So the English would have taken the 1% English, not every English person. I'm not tarring anybody with the whole culture with a one brush, but they take over the lands of the Irish Catholic, and they put their Protestant planters on, and they're called planters because they take your property, they're on it now, and you work for them, and that's just how it is. So it wasn't a very healthy relationship between the Irish Catholics and the planters. However, there was one lady, the planter's daughter, and she was very well respected and loved, quite frankly, by, nobody knows her name, but loved by the Catholics because she really understood their plight, and she understood who she was and what she was and why she was there. So she opened her home to the Catholics and to the folks who would have owned that land previously, and was very generous with them and treated them as equals, as opposed to serfs, which is what they technically were at that stage. So it goes, as night stirred at sea, and the fire brought a crowd in. They say that her beauty was music in mouth, and few by the candlelight thought her too proud, for the house of the planter is known by the trees. Men that had seen her drank deep and were silent. The women were speaking wherever she went, like a bell that is rung or a wonder told shyly. And oh, she was the Sunday in every week.